The ice cracked beneath Diana Novak's feet with a sound like a gunshot, and in the span of a heartbeat, the frozen lake that had seemed so solid swallowed her whole. The shock of the water hitting her body drove every thought from her mind except one. She was going to die. The cold burned through her wool coat and the layers of petticoats beneath her dress, turning her limbs heavy as iron. Above her, through the jagged hole in the ice, she could see the pale, winter sky of South Dakota, the late afternoon sun casting golden light across the surface that might as well have been a mile away. Her gloved hands scraped against the underside of the ice, finding no purchase, no way back to the world of air and warmth and life. The current beneath the frozen surface of the lake pulled at her, dragging her away from the hole, and panic seized her chest tighter than the cold ever could. Diana had been walking across Lake Oahe just outside White River, South Dakota, on this frigid January day in 1884, certain that the ice would hold. It was late January, and the lake had been frozen solid for weeks. Everyone crossed it. The shortcuts saved hours of travel around the shoreline, and she had done it dozens of times that winter. But she had ventured too far toward the center, where the springs beneath kept the water moving, where the ice grew treacherous and thin. She had been hurrying home before dark, her arms full of supplies from the general store, when the world had simply opened up and swallowed her. Now those supplies were gone, sunk into the darkness below, and she was sinking with them. Her lungs burned. The water was so cold, it felt like knives cutting into every inch of her skin. She tried to scream, but no sound came, only bubbles rising from her lips. Her vision began to dim at the edges, darkness creeping in like a curtain falling across a stage. She thought of her mother, dead these past 3 years. She thought of her father, who would find her body come spring when the ice melted. She thought of all the things she would never do, never see, never become. Then something broke through the water above her, and a hand seized her wrist with a grip like iron. Nathan Pierce had been riding along the shoreline, heading back to his small ranch after delivering a string of horses to a buyer in town, when he heard the crack echo across the frozen expanse. He knew that sound. It was the sound of ice giving way, the sound of death reaching up from the depths. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, sensed his sudden tension and responded instantly when Nathan wheeled him toward the lake. There, perhaps 50 yards from shore, he could see the dark hole in the ice and the churning water where someone had gone through. Nathan did not hesitate. He had grown up in these Black Hills, had survived blizzards and droughts, had faced down rustlers and wild animals, and he knew that seconds meant the difference between life and death in water that cold. He swung down from Copper and pulled the rope from his saddle, quickly fashioning a loop and tying the other end around his waist. He looped the free end around Copper's saddle horn, then started across the ice at a run, testing each step but moving fast. The ice groaned beneath his boots, and he could see cracks spiderwebbing out from the hole ahead. He dropped to his belly when he was 10 feet away, distributing his weight, and crawled forward. When he reached the edge and looked down into that black water, he saw her beneath the surface, her face pale as death, her eyes wide and unseeing. She was drifting away from the hole, pulled by the current, and without thinking, Nathan drove his fist into the ice, breaking through, then another punch and another, widening the opening and following the line of her drift. The ice water bit into his arms as he plunged them in, reaching, straining, until his fingers closed around fabric and then flesh. He grabbed her wrist and pulled with all his strength, dragging her back toward the hole, hauling her up through the water and the broken ice until her head broke the surface. She was not breathing. Nathan got his arms under hers and heaved her up onto the ice beside the hole, then scrambled out himself, soaking wet and already feeling the cold settling into his bones. But he did not have time to think about that. He rolled her onto her side and struck her back, hard, once, twice, and on the third blow, water came pouring from her mouth, and she gasped, a horrible rattling sound, then coughed and retched, her whole body convulsing. Air rushed into her lungs in great heaving sobs, and Nathan felt relief flood through him so intense it made him dizzy. But they were not safe yet. They were both soaked through, the air temperature was below freezing, and the sun was already starting to sink toward the horizon. Hypothermia would kill them as surely as drowning if he did not act fast. Nathan got to his feet, pulled Diana up into his arms, and started back across the ice toward shore, moving as quickly as he dared. She was conscious, but barely, shivering so violently he could feel it through his own shaking, her lips blue, her eyes unfocused. He whistled for Copper, and the gelding backed up, keeping the rope taut, providing an anchor point that Nathan followed back to solid ground. Once on shore, Nathan lifted Diana onto Copper's back, then swung up behind her, holding her against his chest. His own clothes were already starting to freeze, his coat stiff with ice, but he forced his hands to work, urged Copper into a trot, and headed not for town, but for his ranch, which was closer. It was a small spread, just a cabin and a barn and some corrals, but it had a fireplace and dry clothes and everything they needed to survive. He could feel Diana's shivering growing weaker, which was a bad sign, her body starting to shut down, and he kicked Copper into a gallop, despite the rough terrain and the fading light. They made it to his cabin as the sun touched the horizon, painting the snow-covered hills in shades of orange and purple. Nathan slid down from the saddle, caught Diana as she slumped sideways, and carried her inside. The cabin was cold, the fire long since burned to ash, but he laid her on the floor near the hearth and went to work with the efficiency of long practice. He had kindling and logs already stacked, and within minutes he had flames crackling to life, heat beginning to pour into the small space. Then he turned to Diana. Her eyes were closed now, her shivering almost stopped, and he knew that was the most dangerous sign of all. He had to get her out of the wet clothes and into something dry and warm, had to raise her body temperature before it was too late. Nathan stripped off his own frozen coat and shirt, tossing them aside, then bent over Diana and began unlacing her boots. His fingers were clumsy with cold, but he forced them to work, pulling off the boots, the soaked stockings, then reaching for the buttons of her coat. He worked quickly but carefully, peeling away the layers of wet wool and cotton, the heavy skirt and the petticoats beneath, until she was down to her undergarments, which were also soaked through. Nathan grabbed blankets from his bed, thick wool that he wrapped around her, then pulled her closer to the fire. He rubbed her arms and legs through the blankets, trying to stimulate circulation, trying to bring warmth back into her body. Her skin was like ice beneath his hands, her lips still that terrible blue color. He added more wood to the fire, building it higher, then stripped off his own wet trousers and boots, leaving him in just his long underwear, and wrapped himself in a blanket as well. The heat from the fire was starting to reach him, painful on his frozen skin, but he ignored it and focused on Diana. Slowly, gradually, her shivering returned, which Nathan knew was a good sign. It meant her body was fighting back, trying to warm itself. He kept rubbing her arms, her hands, speaking to her in a low voice, telling her she was safe, that she was going to be all right, though he was not sure she could hear him. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and as the minutes passed, some color began to return to her cheeks. He pulled her even closer to the fire, keeping the blankets wrapped tight around her, and finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, her eyes fluttered open. She looked up at him with confusion and fear, clearly disoriented, not understanding where she was or what had happened. Then memory must have returned, because her eyes went wide, and she gasped, trying to sit up. Nathan put a hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm, keeping her down. "Easy," he said, his voice rough from the cold. "You are safe. You went through the ice, but you are safe now. You need to stay still and get warm." Diana stared at him, taking in his face, the cabin around them, the fire crackling beside them. "You," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You pulled me out." "Yes," Nathan said simply. "I was drowning. I was under the ice. I could not find the hole." Her voice broke, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I thought I was dead." "You are not dead," Nathan said. "You are here and you are going to be fine." But you need to rest and get warm. You were in that water too long. Diana nodded, fresh tears coming, and she turned her face away from him, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Nathan let her cry, understanding that she needed to release the terror and the trauma of what had just happened. He added more wood to the fire and went to hang their wet clothes on hooks near the hearth where they might dry. Then he went to his small kitchen area and put water on to boil, thinking hot tea would help. His hands were starting to regain feeling, which meant they hurt like hell, but he ignored the pain and focused on the tasks that needed doing. When he returned to Diana's side, she had stopped crying and was watching him with those large, dark eyes, still wide with shock but more focused now. "Thank you," she said, her voice stronger. "You saved my life. I do not even know your name." "Nathan Pierce," he said, settling down beside her, keeping a respectful distance despite the blankets wrapped around them both. "And you do not need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Diana said, shaking her head. "Not anyone. Most people would not have risked the ice. Most people would not have broken through to reach me. You could have died too." She paused, swallowing hard. "I am Diana Novak. Pleased to meet you, Miss Novak," Nathan said, and despite the circumstances, he found himself meaning it. There was something about her, even in her current state, that drew his attention. She was beautiful, certainly, with dark hair that hung in wet tangles around her face and eyes the color of rich earth, but it was more than that. There was a strength in her, even now, a determination that showed in the set of her jaw and the way she held herself despite the fear he could still see lurking in her expression. The water began to boil, and Nathan rose to make tea, finding some dried herbs and honey to add to it. He brought 2 steaming cups back and helped Diana sit up enough to drink, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. The hot liquid seemed to help, bringing even more color to her face, and they sat in silence for a few minutes, sipping their tea and absorbing the warmth of the fire. "What were you doing out on the lake?" Nathan asked finally. It was almost dark. "I was coming back from town," Diana said, her voice apologetic. "I had supplies to carry, and I thought the ice would hold. It has held all winter. I cross it all the time." She paused, looking down at her cup. "I should have stayed closer to shore. I was in a hurry, and I was foolish." "The ice near the center is always dangerous," Nathan said. "There are springs that keep the water moving, keep it from freezing as thick. But you could not have known that if you are not from here." "I have lived here for 3 years," Diana said. "I should have known better. My father warned me about the springs, but I thought I knew the safe path." She looked up at him, her eyes meeting his. "Where did you come from? How did you happen to be there at just the right moment?" "I was riding back from town along the shore. I heard the ice crack." Nathan shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I was just in the right place." "No," Diana said firmly. "You were exactly where you needed to be. You saved me, Nathan Pierce, and I will never forget that." Nathan felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with the fire, and he looked away, taking another sip of his tea. He was not accustomed to such direct acknowledgement, such open emotion. He had lived alone for the past 2 years, since his parents had died of fever, running the small ranch by himself and keeping mostly to his own company. He dealt with people when he had to, selling horses and buying supplies, but he did not have friends in town, did not court any of the young women at church socials. He had always been more comfortable with animals than people, more at ease in the wild spaces than in crowded rooms. But sitting here with Diana Novak, wrapped in blankets by his fire, he found himself wanting to talk, wanting to know more about her. "You said you have lived here 3 years?" he asked. "What brought you to White River?" "My father," Diana said. "He worked for the railroad back east in Ohio, but he wanted land of his own. He heard about the homestead opportunities out here, and we came west after my mother died. He claimed a section of land south of town, and we have been working it since." She smiled, though there was sadness in it. It has been hard, but good. My father is happy here in a way he never was back east. What about you? Nathan asked. Are you happy here? Diana considered the question, her eyes distant. I think so, she said slowly. It is lonely sometimes. There are not many young women my age in the area, and the work is constant. But there is something about this land, this wide open space that feels right to me. I love the sky here, the way it goes on forever. I love the quiet. She looked at him. What about you? Have you always lived here? Born and raised, Nathan said. My parents came here when this was still Dakota territory, before it was divided into North and South Dakota. They built this ranch from nothing, and when they died, I kept it going. It is not much, but it is mine. I am sorry about your parents, Diana said softly. Nathan nodded, the old grief still there, but dulled by time. It was 2 years ago. Fever took them both within a week of each other. He looked around the cabin, at the simple furniture his father had built, the quilts his mother had sewn. I think they would be proud of what I have done with the place. The horse breeding is starting to turn a profit, and I am adding cattle this spring. They talked on as the fire burned and the night deepened outside, their clothes slowly drying on the hooks, the cabin growing warm and comfortable. Nathan found himself telling Diana things he had not spoken of in years, about his childhood in the Black Hills, about learning to track and hunt from the Lakota people who had been his family's neighbors before the wars drove them onto reservations, about his dreams for the ranch and the life he wanted to build. Diana spoke of her mother, who had died of consumption, of the journey west that had been both terrifying and exhilarating, of the small cabin she shared with her father, and the garden she planned to plant come spring. It was only when Diana yawned, her eyes drooping with exhaustion, that Nathan realized how late it had grown. The fire had burned down to coals, and the cabin was filled with a comfortable warmth. He rose and added more wood, then looked at Diana with some concern. You should sleep, he said. You have been through an ordeal, and your body needs rest. You can take my bed, and I will sleep out here by the fire. Diana looked like she wanted to protest, but another yawn overtook her, and she nodded. Only if you are sure, she said. I do not want to put you out. You are not putting me out, Nathan assured her. He went to his small bedroom and retrieved a nightshirt, clean and dry, then brought it to her. This will be more comfortable than sleeping in a blanket. I will turn my back while you change. He did so, hearing the rustle of fabric as Diana stood and pulled on the nightshirt, which was far too large for her, but would be warm and decent. When she told him he could turn around, he saw her standing there, the nightshirt hanging almost to her ankles, her dark hair beginning to dry in waves around her face. She looked young and vulnerable and heartbreakingly lovely, and Nathan felt something shift in his chest, something he had not felt in a very long time. He led her to his bedroom, a small space with just a bed and a trunk and a washstand, and she climbed under the quilts with a sigh of relief. Thank you, she said again, her eyes already closing. For everything. Rest, Nathan said softly, and he left the room, closing the door behind him. He made himself a pallet by the fire with extra blankets and lay down, but sleep was long in coming. His mind kept returning to the moment he had seen Diana beneath the ice, the terror on her face, the desperate way her hands had clawed at the frozen surface above her. He had acted on instinct without thought for his own safety, and now that the crisis was past, he found himself shaken by how close she had come to death. Another minute, maybe less, and she would have been beyond saving. The thought made his chest tight, made him want to go check on her, to make sure she was still breathing, still safe. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him, and he slept, though his dreams were full of dark water and cracking ice, and a woman's face pale as death beneath the frozen surface. He woke to find pale morning light filtering through the cabin windows, and the smell of coffee filling the air. Nathan sat up, confused for a moment, then remembered the events of the previous day. Diana. He looked toward the kitchen area and saw her standing at his stove, still wearing his nightshirt, her hair hanging loose down her back. She had found his coffee pot and was brewing a pot, and the sight of her there, in his cabin, doing such a domestic task, made something warm bloom in his chest. "You should be resting," he said, his voice rough with sleep. Diana turned, and he saw that she looked much better than she had the night before. There was color in her cheeks, and her eyes were bright. "I feel fine," she said. "A little sore and my throat hurts, but otherwise I am well. I wanted to make myself useful, and I thought you might appreciate coffee when you woke." Nathan got to his feet, wrapping a blanket around himself, suddenly aware that he was only in his long underwear. His clothes from yesterday were dry now, hanging by the fire, and he grabbed them and retreated to change. When he emerged, dressed in his usual work clothes, Diana had poured 2 cups of coffee and was sitting at his small table, cradling one between her hands. He joined her, accepting the cup she offered, and they sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping the strong brew. Outside, he could hear Copper moving around in the barn, and he realized he had not tended to his horse the night before, too focused on Diana. The gelding would need feed and water, and there were other chores that could not be neglected. "I need to take care of the horses," Nathan said. "Will you be all right here alone for a bit?" "Of course," Diana said. "But then I should be getting home. My father will be worried sick. He expected me back yesterday afternoon." Nathan nodded, though he found himself reluctant to let her go. "I will saddle Copper and ride you home after I finish the chores. You should not walk, not after what you have been through." "Thank you," Diana said, and she smiled at him, a real smile that lit up her whole face. "You are very kind, Nathan Pierce." He ducked his head, uncomfortable with the praise, and finished his coffee. Then he pulled on his coat and hat and headed out to the barn. The morning was cold and clear, the sky a brilliant blue overhead, the snow sparkling in the sunlight. It was the kind of day that made him grateful to be alive, and as he fed Copper and the other horses he kept in the barn, he found himself thinking about Diana, about the way she had looked standing in his kitchen, about the sound of her laugh when she had told him a story about her father's attempts at gardening. He barely knew her, had spent less than 12 hours in her company, but already he found himself drawn to her in a way he could not explain. When he returned to the cabin, Diana had washed up and braided her hair, and she had laid out her clothes from yesterday, which were now dry, though wrinkled and stiff with lake water. She disappeared into his bedroom to change, and when she emerged, she was dressed in her dark skirt and white blouse, looking more like the proper young woman she was, and less like the half-drowned creature he had pulled from the lake. Nathan saddled Copper and helped Diana up onto the gelding's back, then swung up behind her. She gave him directions to her father's homestead, which was about an hour's ride south of his ranch, and they set off through the winter landscape. Diana sat in front of him, and Nathan was acutely aware of her warmth, the way she fit against him, the faint scent of her hair. He found himself wishing the ride was longer, that he had more time with her before returning her to her father and her life. They talked as they rode, Diana telling him more about her father, a man named Thomas Novak, who sounded both determined and kind, and Nathan finding himself sharing more stories of his own family, his own history. It felt easy to talk to her, natural in a way that talking to people rarely felt for him, and by the time her father's homestead came into view, a small cabin with a barn and some cultivated fields now covered in snow, Nathan knew that he did not want this to be the last time he saw Diana Novak. A man came running out of the cabin as they approached, his face etched with worry. He was perhaps 50, with graying hair and a weathered face, and when he saw Diana on the horse, relief flooded his features. "Diana!" he shouted. "Thank God! I have been out of my mind. When you did not come home yesterday, I thought something terrible must have happened." Nathan helped Diana down from Copper, and she ran to her father, throwing her arms around him. "I am sorry, Papa," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "I fell through the ice on the lake. I would have drowned if not for this man. He saved my life." Thomas Novak looked up at Nathan, his eyes wide with shock and gratitude. "You saved her?" he said, his voice breaking. "My God, you saved my daughter's life?" Nathan dismounted, feeling awkward under the man's intense gaze. "I was in the right place at the right time," he said. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Thomas said, shaking his head emphatically. "Not anyone. Most men would not have risked their own life to save a stranger." He released Diana and came forward, extending his hand. "I am Thomas Novak, and I owe you a debt I can never repay. Thank you. Thank you for bringing my daughter back to me." Nathan shook his hand, feeling the strength in the older man's grip, seeing the tears shining in his eyes. "I am Nathan Pierce," he said, "and I am glad I could help." Thomas insisted that Nathan come inside, that he share breakfast with them, and though Nathan initially tried to decline, both Diana and her father were so insistent that he finally agreed. The cabin was similar to his own, small but tidy, with evidence of Diana's touch in the curtains on the windows and the quilt on the back of the rocking chair. They sat around a small table while Diana and Thomas worked together to prepare eggs and bacon and fresh biscuits, and Nathan found himself enjoying the simple domesticity of the scene, the easy affection between father and daughter. Over breakfast, Diana told her father the full story of what had happened, and Nathan filled in details when she asked. Thomas listened with a pale face, clearly shaken by how close he had come to losing his daughter, and when the tale was finished, he reached across the table and gripped Nathan's hand again. "You're welcome here any time," he said. "Any time at all. Our home is your home, Nathan Pierce." Nathan thanked him, touched by the sincerity in the man's voice, and when breakfast was finished and it was time for him to leave, Diana walked him out to where Copper waited. The morning sun was bright now, the day warming slightly, though it was still well below freezing. "I meant what I said last night," Diana said, looking up at him with those dark eyes. "I will never forget what you did for me. You gave me my life back." "I am just glad I was there," Nathan said, and he hesitated, then added, "Your father said I was welcome any time. I hope that extends to you as well. I would like to see you again, Miss Novak, if that would be acceptable." Diana's face lit up with a smile that made his heart skip. "I would like that very much," she said. "Very much indeed." Nathan rode back to his ranch with a lightness in his chest he had not felt in years, and as he went about his work that day and the days that followed, he found his thoughts constantly returning to Diana. He waited what he hoped was a respectful amount of time, nearly a week, and then one Sunday afternoon, he saddled Copper and rode to the Novak homestead, his heart pounding with nervousness. Diana answered his knock, and her face broke into a delighted smile when she saw him. "Nathan," she said. "Come in, please. Papa is just putting on coffee." He spent the afternoon with them, talking with Thomas about ranching and horses and the challenges of making a life in South Dakota, and talking with Diana about books and music and 100 other topics. Thomas, he discovered, was a shrewd and intelligent man who had opinions on everything from politics to agriculture, and Diana was well-read and thoughtful, with ideas and dreams that she expressed without apology. Nathan found himself fascinated by both of them, and when he finally took his leave as the sun was setting, Thomas invited him to return for dinner later in the week. So began a pattern that would define the next several months of Nathan's life. He visited the Novak homestead regularly, sometimes staying for just an hour or two, sometimes remaining the whole day, helping Thomas with repairs or bringing Diana books he thought she might enjoy. He learned that she loved poetry, especially Whitman and Dickinson, and that she had a beautiful singing voice that she was shy about sharing. He learned that she was an excellent cook but a terrible seamstress, that she could ride a horse fearlessly but was afraid of spiders, that she had a quick temper but an even quicker sense of humor. And somewhere along the way, without him quite realizing when or how it happened, he fell completely and irrevocably in love with her. It was not a sudden thing, not a lightning bolt of realization. It was gradual, like snow accumulating over the course of a long winter, until one day he looked at the depth of what he felt and was astonished by it. He loved the way she laughed, her whole face transforming with joy. He loved the way she thought about things, considering all angles before forming an opinion. He loved her kindness, the way she never spoke ill of anyone, and her strength, the way she faced challenges without complaint. He loved everything about her, and the intensity of that love sometimes frightened him. Winter gave way to early spring, the snow beginning to melt, the first green shoots appearing in the sheltered places. Nathan had been visiting the Novak homestead for nearly 3 months, and he knew that Thomas had noticed the way Nathan looked at his daughter, the way Diana's eyes followed Nathan whenever he was in the room. One evening in late March, as Nathan was preparing to leave, Thomas asked him to stay behind for a moment. Diana went inside, leaving the two men alone on the porch, and Thomas turned to Nathan with a serious expression. "You have feelings for my daughter," he said. It was not a question. Nathan met his eyes steadily. "Yes, sir, I do. And what are your intentions?" Nathan took a deep breath. He had known this conversation was coming, had been preparing for it, but now that the moment was here, his heart was racing. "I want to marry her," he said. "If she will have me, if you will give us your blessing." Thomas studied him for a long moment, and Nathan forced himself not to look away, to meet the older man's scrutiny without flinching. Finally, Thomas nodded. "I have been watching you these past months," he said. "I have seen the way you treat Diana, with respect and kindness. I have seen the man you are, hardworking and honest. You saved her life, Nathan, and now I believe you would spend the rest of your life making her happy. You have my blessing, but the decision is Diana's to make." Relief flooded through Nathan, so intense it made him dizzy. "Thank you, sir," he managed to say. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," Thomas said with a small smile. "You still have to ask her." Nathan had been planning to do just that, but he wanted it to be special, wanted to find the right moment and the right words. The opportunity came a week later, on a warm April day, when the prairie was coming alive with wildflowers and the sky was a brilliant blue overhead. He rode to the Novak homestead in the afternoon and asked Diana if she would like to go for a ride with him. She agreed eagerly, and Thomas saddled her mare, a gentle gray named Misty, and they rode out together across the open grassland. Nathan led them to a place he had discovered years ago, a small rise overlooking a creek where cottonwood trees grew, and the view stretched for miles in every direction. They dismounted and sat on the grass, watching the water flow by, and for a while they simply enjoyed the peace and beauty of the day. Then Nathan took a deep breath and turned to Diana. "There is something I need to tell you," he said, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she must be able to hear it. "Something I have been wanting to say for a long time." Diana turned to him, her eyes curious and perhaps a little apprehensive. "What is it?" Nathan took her hand in his, marveling at how small it was, how delicate, and yet he knew the strength in those hands, had seen her work alongside her father, had seen her face down her own fear and trauma with courage. "Diana, from the moment I pulled you from that lake, my life changed. I did not know it then, but you became the most important person in my world. These past months, getting to know you, spending time with you, have been the happiest of my life. You are everything I never knew I was looking for. You are kind and strong and beautiful and smart, and I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." Diana's eyes went wide, her lips parting in surprise, but Nathan pressed on, needing to get the words out. "I know I am just a rancher with not much to offer. I do not have a fancy house or a lot of money, but I have a ranch that is starting to prosper, and I have two hands willing to work hard, and I have a heart that belongs entirely to you. Diana Novak, will you marry me? Will you be my wife?" For a moment, Diana just stared at him, and Nathan felt panic begin to rise. Had he misread her feelings? Had he been wrong to think she cared for him the way he cared for her? But then tears began to spill down her cheeks, and she was nodding, a smile breaking across her face like sunrise. Yes, she said, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, Nathan, I will marry you. I love you too. I have loved you for weeks, maybe months. I was just afraid to say it, afraid it might not be real. Nathan felt joy explode through him, bright and fierce, and he pulled Diana into his arms, holding her tight, feeling her heart beat against his chest. It is real, he whispered into her hair. This is real. You and me, we are real. They stayed there by the creek for hours, talking about the future, about the life they would build together. Nathan told her about his plans for the ranch, about wanting to expand the horse breeding operation and build a larger house. Diana spoke of the garden she wanted to plant, of the children she hoped they would have someday, of growing old together in this wild, beautiful land. They kissed as the sun began to set, a gentle, tentative kiss that quickly deepened into something more passionate, more urgent, until they were both breathless and flushed. We should go back, Diana said reluctantly. Papa will wonder where we are. Let him wonder a bit longer, Nathan said, stealing another kiss. I want to stay here with you forever. But eventually they did ride back, and when they arrived at the homestead, Thomas took one look at their faces and broke into a wide grin. I take it she said yes? He asked. She said yes, Nathan confirmed, unable to keep the joy from his voice. Thomas pulled Diana into a hug, then shook Nathan's hand firmly. Welcome to the family, son, he said, and Nathan felt the weight of those words, the acceptance and love behind them. They decided to marry in June, giving them time to prepare and for Nathan to make some improvements to his cabin. He threw himself into the work with an energy born of happiness, adding a second bedroom and enlarging the main room, building new furniture and repairing the barn. Diana came to visit several times to see the progress, and each time Nathan saw the delight in her eyes, it spurred him to work even harder. The wedding was held at the small church in White River, with most of the town in attendance. Diana wore a simple white dress that she and a neighbor woman had sewn together, and she carried wildflowers that Nathan had picked that morning. She was so beautiful standing at the altar, the sunlight streaming through the windows and touching her hair, that Nathan felt his throat tighten with emotion. They spoke their vows in strong, clear voices, promising to love and honor and cherish each other all the days of their lives. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed Diana with all the love and joy in his heart. The reception was held at the church hall with food and music and dancing. Thomas made a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes, speaking of how Nathan had saved Diana's life and now would share that life with her. Friends and neighbors congratulated them, wished them well, and as Nathan danced with his bride, her head resting on his shoulder, he thought about how strange and wonderful life was. Just 6 months ago, he had been alone, resigned to a solitary existence. Now he had a wife, a partner, someone to share his days and nights with, and he could hardly believe his good fortune. They spent their wedding night at Nathan's ranch, which was now their ranch, and as they lay together in the darkness, Diana curled against his side. Nathan felt a peace and contentment he had never known. This was what he had been missing all these years, this connection, this intimacy, this love. Diana was his home now, more than any building or piece of land, and he knew that as long as they were together, he would be happy. The summer passed in a blur of work and happiness. Diana threw herself into making the ranch a true home, planting a garden and sewing curtains and cooking meals that made the cabin smell like heaven. Nathan worked from dawn to dusk, training horses and tending cattle, and they fell into an easy rhythm, each supporting the other, each making the other's burdens lighter. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the prairie, talking about their day, making plans for the future, simply enjoying each other's company. Thomas visited regularly, pleased to see his daughter so happy, and he and Nathan grew close, the older man becoming the father Nathan had lost. They hunted together, worked together on projects that required extra hands, and sat up late talking about everything and nothing. Diana would watch them with satisfaction, glad that the two most important men in her life had become such good friends. As summer turned to fall, Diana began to feel unwell in the mornings, and after a few weeks of this, they realized what it meant. She was pregnant, carrying their first child, and the news filled them both with joy and a little fear. They were so young, Nathan only 23 and Diana 21, but they were ready to be parents, ready to expand their family. Nathan became even more protective of Diana, insisting she rest more, do less of the heavy work, though she laughed at his worry and assured him she was fine. Winter came again, and Diana's belly grew round with their child. Nathan found himself thinking often of the day he had pulled her from the lake, of how close he had come to losing her before he ever really knew her. Sometimes in the dark of night he would wake from nightmares where he had not reached her in time, where she had slipped away beneath the ice, and he would reach for her, needing to feel her warmth, her breath, the solid reality of her beside him. She would wake and soothe him, understanding without words what haunted him, and he would hold her and their unborn child and feel gratitude so intense it was almost painful. Their son was born in February 1885, exactly 1 year after the day Nathan had saved Diana from the lake. The labor was long and difficult, with only an elderly midwife from town and Thomas to help, and Nathan spent hours pacing outside the bedroom, praying harder than he had ever prayed in his life. When he finally heard the cry of a baby, relief flooded through him, so intense his knees nearly buckled. The midwife emerged a few minutes later and told him he could come in, and Nathan entered the bedroom to find Diana propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "It is a boy," she said, her voice tired but happy. "A healthy, beautiful boy." Nathan approached the bed, his heart so full he thought it might burst, and looked down at his son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect features, and as Nathan watched, the infant opened his eyes and seemed to look right at him. Nathan felt something shift in his chest, a love so fierce and primal it took his breath away. This was his son, his child, a piece of him and Diana combined into a new life. "He's perfect," Nathan whispered. "You're perfect. Thank you, Diana. Thank you for this gift." They named him William, after Nathan's father, with the middle name Thomas, after Diana's father. Thomas wept when they told him, overcome with emotion, and he held his grandson with trembling hands, marveling at the tiny life. Nathan watched his father-in-law with the baby and felt his family expanding, growing stronger, becoming something more than he had ever imagined. The early months of parenthood were exhausting, filled with sleepless nights and constant worry, but they were also joyful beyond measure. Nathan loved watching Diana with their son, the tender way she nursed him and sang to him and simply held him. He loved the weight of the baby in his own arms, the trust in those tiny eyes, the grip of small fingers around his thumb. He threw himself into providing for his family with renewed determination, working even harder to make the ranch successful, to ensure that Diana and William would always have everything they needed. As William grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Nathan's reputation as a horse breeder spread, and he had more buyers than he could supply. He hired a young man from town to help with the work, and they built additional corrals and expanded the barn. Diana's garden flourished, providing vegetables through the summer and canned goods for the winter, and she began selling her surplus at the general store in White River. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Thomas remained a constant presence in their lives, doting on his grandson and helping with the ranch work when he could. But as William's second birthday approached, Thomas began to slow down, to tire more easily. Diana noticed it first and worried, but her father brushed off her concerns, insisting he was fine, just getting older. Then one morning in the spring of 1887, Thomas did not wake up. He had died peacefully in his sleep, his heart simply giving out. The loss hit Diana hard, and Nathan held her through her grief, understanding the pain of losing a parent, remembering his own loss. They buried Thomas on his homestead, under a cottonwood tree he had planted when they first arrived in South Dakota, and Diana spoke of her father with love and gratitude, of all he had given her, all he had taught her. Nathan added his own words, thanking Thomas for welcoming him into the family, for becoming the father he had needed. William, too young to understand death, placed wildflowers on his grandfather's grave, and they all stood together, a family bound by love and loss. Diana inherited her father's homestead, and after much discussion, they decided to sell it and use the money to further expand Nathan's ranch. It was bittersweet, letting go of the place where Diana had lived with her father, but she knew Thomas would have approved, would have wanted them to use his legacy to build their future. They hired more help, bought more cattle and horses, and the ranch continued to grow. As the years passed, their family grew as well. A daughter arrived in 1888, whom they named Sarah after Nathan's mother. Then another son in 1890, whom they called James. Their cabin was expanded again and again until it was more of a house with multiple bedrooms and a large kitchen and a parlor where they could gather in the evenings. The children grew strong and healthy, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with chores as soon as they were able. William inherited his father's quiet strength and his mother's intelligence. Sarah had her mother's dark eyes and her father's gentle nature, and James was a whirlwind of energy and mischief who kept them all on their toes. Nathan and Diana grew into their roles as parents and ranchers, their love deepening with each passing year. They had their challenges, certainly. There were droughts that killed crops and harsh winters that decimated herds. There were illnesses and injuries and the constant worry that came with raising children on the frontier. But they faced it all together, supporting each other, loving each other, building a life that was richer and fuller than either had ever imagined. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1895, Nathan took Diana back to the spot by the creek where he had proposed. The children were with a neighbor for the day, giving them rare time alone together. They sat on the grass, older now but still young, still healthy, still deeply in love. Nathan looked at his wife, at the lines beginning to appear at the corners of her eyes, the strands of gray in her dark hair, and thought she had never been more beautiful. "Do you remember when I asked you to marry me, here in this very spot?" he said. Diana smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "Of course I remember. It was one of the best days of my life." "Mine too," Nathan said. He paused, then added, "Do you ever think about that day on the lake? The day we met?" Diana was quiet for a moment, and he felt her hand find his, their fingers intertwining. "I think about it often," she said softly. "I think about how close I came to dying, to never knowing you, never having our children, never living this life. It terrifies me sometimes, Nathan. The thought of all we would have lost if you had not been there." "But I was there," Nathan said firmly. "And you did not die. You lived and we found each other, and we built this life together. That is what matters." "I know," Diana said, "and I am grateful every single day. You saved me, Nathan, in more ways than just pulling me from the water. You gave me love and family and purpose. You gave me everything." Nathan turned to her, cupping her face in his hands, looking into those eyes he loved so much. "You gave me the same," he said. "I was just existing before I met you, going through the motions. You made me truly live. You made me whole." They kissed there by the creek, a kiss filled with 10 years of love and partnership, and shared joy and sorrow. When they finally pulled apart, Diana rested her head on Nathan's chest, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "I love you," he said. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Diana replied. "Forever and always." They stayed there until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, the same colors that had lit the sky the evening Nathan had carried Diana to his cabin and saved her life. It felt fitting somehow, this echo of that first day, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children. William grew into a fine young man, serious and capable, eventually taking over more and more of the ranch work. Sarah became a teacher at the school in White River, beloved by her students, and James, after a rebellious youth, found his calling as a blacksmith, opening a shop in town. Nathan and Diana became grandparents, first when William married and had children of his own, then when Sarah and James did the same. The ranch house filled with the laughter of grandchildren, and Nathan and Diana delighted in this new phase of their lives. They grew old together, their hair turning silver, their bodies slowing down, but their love remained as strong as ever. They still walked together in the evenings when the weather was fine, still sat on the porch and watched the sunset, still held hands like young sweethearts. Their children and grandchildren would see them and smile, recognizing the depth of the bond between them, hoping to find something similar in their own lives. On a cold day in January 1914, exactly 30 years after Nathan had pulled Diana from the frozen lake, they took a walk together across the ranch. The land had changed over the decades, new buildings added, more fences erected, but the essential character of the place remained the same. This was the home they had built together, the legacy they would leave to their children and grandchildren. They stopped at the top of a rise, looking out over the expanse of their property, and Diana squeezed Nathan's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "The life you chose? You could have married someone else, someone who came with land or money or connections. Instead, you got me, a girl you pulled from a lake." Nathan turned to her, surprised by the question. "Regret?" he said. "Diana, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Everything good in my life flows from that moment on the ice. Our children, our grandchildren, this ranch, this life we have built together. How could I possibly regret any of it?" Diana smiled, though there were tears in her eyes. "I just wanted to hear you say it," she said. "After all these years, I still sometimes cannot believe how lucky I am, that you were there that day, that you saved me, that you loved me." "The luck was all mine," Nathan said, pulling her into his arms. "You saved me too, you know. You saved me from loneliness, from a half-lived life. You made me complete." They stood there together as the winter sun shone down on them, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life filled with love and purpose and meaning. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, and they turned back toward the house, walking slowly, supporting each other as they had for 3 decades. Nathan and Diana lived for many more years, each day a gift they treasured. They celebrated births and marriages, mourned losses, watched their grandchildren grow into adults with children of their own. The ranch passed to William, who ran it with the same dedication his father had shown, and Nathan and Diana settled into a comfortable retirement, content to advise when asked, but mostly just enjoying the fruits of their labor. Diana died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1925 at the age of 62. Nathan woke to find her cold beside him, and though he had known this day would come eventually, the pain of it nearly broke him. She had been his partner for 40 years, his best friend, the love of his life, and the world without her in it seemed impossibly empty. They buried her next to the spot where they used to watch the sunset, and Nathan stood at her grave with their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren around him, marveling at the family they had created, the legacy they were leaving behind. Nathan lived for 2 more years after Diana's death, years he spent mostly in quiet reflection, surrounded by family. He told stories of the old days to anyone who would listen, keeping Diana's memory alive through his words. He spoke often of the day they met, of pulling her from the lake, of the moment he realized he loved her. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren listened with wide eyes, captivated by the romance of it, by the idea that their family had begun with such drama. On a cold January morning in 1927, exactly 43 years after he had saved Diana's life, Nathan died. He was 67 years old, had lived a long and full life, and his passing was peaceful. His last words, spoken to William, who sat at his bedside, were about Diana. "Tell your mother I am coming," he whispered. "Tell her I have missed her every moment of every day, and I am ready to be with her again." They buried Nathan beside Diana, Under the open sky they had both loved, and the family gathered to mourn and to celebrate. William spoke of his parents' love for each other, of how it had been the foundation of their family, the example they had all tried to follow. Sarah sang a hymn in her still clear voice, and James carved a beautiful headstone that bore both their names and a simple inscription: together in life, together in eternity. The ranch continued for generations after Nathan and Diana were gone, their descendants working the land they had built up, telling the story of how it all began. The tale of the cowboy who saved the young woman from the frozen lake became family legend, passed down through the years, embellished and polished until it took on an almost mythic quality. But at its heart, it remained true. It was a story about courage and love, about two people who found each other in the most unlikely way and built a life together that lasted beyond their own years. The lake where Diana had fallen through the ice still froze every winter, and sometimes the descendants of Nathan and Diana would walk across it, thinking of their ancestors, marveling at the chain of events that had led to their own existence. They knew that if Nathan had not been riding along the shore that day, if he had not heard the crack of breaking ice, if he had not risked his own life to save a stranger, none of them would exist. Their entire family tree sprang from that one moment of heroism, that one act of selfless courage. And so they remembered Nathan and Diana, not just as individuals, but as a unit, two halves of a whole, a love story that had defied the odds and created something beautiful and lasting. The ranch they built still stood, though it had been modernized over the decades. The land they worked was still productive, still supporting their descendants. And the love they shared remained an inspiration, a reminder that the best things in life were worth fighting for, worth risking everything to achieve. In the end, Nathan and Diana's story was simple. It was about a man who saved a woman's life, and in doing so found his own purpose and meaning. It was about a woman who nearly died but lived to build a family and a legacy. It was about love growing from trauma, about two people choosing each other day after day, year after year, until their lives were so intertwined they could not be separated. It was about the ordinary magic of commitment and partnership, about raising children and building a home and working side by side through all the challenges life threw at them. It was, in short, a love story, one that began with cracking ice and freezing water, with desperate hands reaching through darkness, with a cowboy who refused to let a stranger die. One that continued through courtship and marriage, through children and grandchildren, through decades of shared joy and sorrow. And one that ended not with death, but with legacy, with the knowledge that what Nathan and Diana had built together would continue long after they were gone. The family still gathers every January, on the anniversary of the day Nathan saved Diana, to remember and to celebrate. They stand together by the graves, multiple generations spanning more than a century, and they tell the story again. The children listen with wide eyes, the adults with knowing smiles, and everyone feels the connection to those two people who started it all. They think about fate and chance, about being in the right place at the right time, about how one moment can change everything. And they give thanks for Nathan Pierce, the cowboy who heard ice cracking and did not hesitate, who broke through and saved Diana Novak's life, who loved her with everything he had for 40 years, and who gave them all the gift of existence. They give thanks for Diana, who survived and thrived, who built a home and raised children and loved her husband with equal devotion. They give thanks for the life those two people created, for the example they set, for the love that still echoes through the generations. The sun sets over the South Dakota prairie, painting the sky in brilliant colors, the same sky Nathan and Diana watched together for so many years. The family disperses, returning to their own homes and lives, but carrying the story with them, keeping it alive. And if you listen closely on a cold winter night, when the wind howls across the frozen lake and the ice creaks and groans, you might almost hear it, the sound of breaking ice, a splash, a shout. And then if you listen even closer, You might hear laughter and conversation, the sound of two people falling in love, building a life, creating something that will last forever. Because that is what Nathan and Diana did. They took one terrible moment, one brush with death, and transformed it into a lifetime of love. They took fear and trauma and turned it into joy and purpose. They looked at each other and chose again and again to stay, to fight, to love, to build. And in doing so, they created something beautiful, something lasting, something that would outlive them both and touch the lives of people not yet born. Their story is not unique. Throughout history, people have met in unlikely ways, have overcome obstacles to be together, have built lives and families that endure. But every love story is unique to those living it. And for Nathan and Diana, their story was everything. It was the defining narrative of their lives, the thing that made them who they were, individually and together. It was the foundation on which everything else was built, and it never wavered, never weakened, never failed them. And so the story ends where it began, on the frozen lake in South Dakota, with Nathan Pierce breaking through the ice to save Diana Novak. But it also does not end there because the ripples of that moment continue outward, touching lives decades and centuries later. The descendants of Nathan and Diana carry their blood, their legacy, their love forward into the future. The ranch they built still produces horses and cattle. The lessons they taught their children echo in the values of their great-great-great-grandchildren. The love they shared remains an ideal, a goal, something to aspire to and hope for. In the final accounting, Nathan and Diana's story is about hope. It is about the hope that even in our darkest moments, salvation might come. It is about the hope that love can grow from trauma, that beauty can arise from terror. It is about the hope that we might find someone who sees us truly, who loves us completely, who chooses us day after day. It is about the hope that what we build in our lives will matter, will last, will mean something to those who come after. Nathan gave Diana her life back that cold January day in 1884, pulling her from the freezing water before it was too late. But Diana gave Nathan something equally precious. She gave him purpose and meaning, love and partnership, a reason to live fully rather than merely exist. They saved each other in ways large and small, obvious and subtle throughout their 40 years together. And in doing so, they proved that love is not just an emotion but an action, a choice, a commitment renewed each day. The story of Nathan and Diana, the cowboy, and the woman he saved from the frozen lake, lives on. It lives in the hearts of their descendants, in the land they worked, in the home they built. It lives in every couple who chooses love in the face of fear, who commits to partnership despite uncertainty, who builds a life together one day at a time. It lives in every act of courage, every selfless rescue, every moment when someone chooses to help a stranger rather than walk away. It lives in the ordinary magic of long marriages and raising families and growing old together. It lives, and it will continue to live, as long as people tell stories about love and hope and second chances. As long as people believe that one moment can change everything, that love can grow from the most unlikely beginnings, that happily ever after is not just a fairy tale, but something real people can achieve. Nathan and Diana achieved it. They lived it. And their story, told and retold through the generations, reminds us all that it is possible, that love is possible, that saving and being saved is possible, that building something beautiful and lasting is possible, that happy endings are possible, not just in stories, but in real life, in the wild west of South Dakota, in a small ranch house filled with family, in two people who chose each other and never stopped choosing each other until death parted them and then reunited them in whatever comes after. Their story is complete, their ending perfect, their legacy secure. And the love they shared continues to echo through time, a testament to what is possible when two hearts find each other and refuse to let go.